Today I want to talk about a very useful watercolor technique that can really improve the look of your watercolor paintings. And even if you're a beginner artist, when you really learn this technique and practice it, your paintings will look like it's been made by someone who's been painting for a long time, just because it removes that using this technique removes that hard lines that are really common with beginner artists, that they have a lot of harder lines. For example, if they want to paint a mountain, I'm just mixing some quinacridone magenta with some blue just to show you what kind of hard edge I'm talking about. Just imagine like a little bit of a muted purple color for the mountain. And when you paint wet on dry with watercolor, you get really hard edges. Especially this is more noticeable when the painting is completely dry. And these harder lines can look really amateurish, because when you have more experience, you know how to play with edges, how to create soft edges. Now, of course, we can have soft edges by painting wet on wet. That's not the focus of today's video. Of course, you can wet the paper first. I'm using a piece of Saunders rough surface watercolor paper. For example, you put some water on the paper and you can achieve some softer edges by painting your mountains like this. I think I'm gonna add a touch of indigo. And of course, you don't want to have too much water on your brush because the paper is already wet. So you come here and you paint your mountain and you have this soft edges. But sometimes you don't want to have so much soft edge. Like you want this upper line of the mountain to be slightly on a harder side, and the bottom edges you want it to be really soft, and you want to create a really nice foggy and misty effect. This technique that I want to talk about today is the technique that I used in every single painting that I paint. It's not just for creating a foggy effect, just anything that you want to have a little bit of a softer edge. And it's a very useful technique, I think, especially for beginners, because beginners, when they're trying to work wet on wet, there's a lot of timing going on. I'm not saying wet on wet is not suitable for them, but sometimes you're not as fast, and it takes some time to do all the things, and you don't get the time to finish your painting. But this technique allows you to paint a shape and then create the softer edges by softening edges using a clean damp brush. I think this is an amazing, very, very useful technique. For example, here I'm going to be painting mountain, just a very simple shape for the mountain, and I want to have some kind of a foggy effect, or not just fog, I just wanted to have like a atmospheric look to it. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to clean my brush, and I'm taking the excess water like this, dabbing it here a little bit so it's not too wet, and I'm dragging my brush at the bottom edges of this shape of the mountain that I just painted. And this would just blend it out, and it would create a really nice effect. You can use this for almost anything, and it just immediately gives your paintings a look of a more professional artist. And there are a few tips that I'd like to share with you when using this technique. The first tip that I wanted to share with you is that the larger your brush, the easier it is to create the same effect. For example, I have a smaller brush here. I'm going to paint a mountain. Getting more water. Just painting the mountain. And once you become more familiar with this technique, it'll get easier for you to do it even using a smaller brush. But especially when you're just starting out, it's not as easy to use a smaller brush when softening edges. You basically want to have, you can still do it, it's not impossible, but you just gotta be very comfortable with using this technique to be able to do it. But this is a size 12 round brush. I don't know what noise that was, kind of scared me. But yeah, so you want to have this kind of a size brush so that it's easier. You don't have to go back and forth, because with watercolor, the fewer your brush strokes, the fresher your watercolors look. So the larger your brush, the better. Another tip that I wanted to tell you is the amount of water that you want to have on your brush while softening these edges. For example, I'm painting another mountain here. And if I don't take the excess water off my brush, just clean my brush, and maybe get it a little bit, but the brush is super wet. If I go back and try to soften edges, you can see that it is softening the edges, but it might create a really bad background because the water is a lot more here than it was here initially when I was painting the mountain. So once this dry completely, there's a really high chance that there's going to be a background. I'm using Saunders watercolor paper, and Saunders is a really good paper. This is probably not even going to create a background, but for example, I have Arch paper here. I can even show it to you. This is another tip that I wanted to talk about, different papers that you use. For example, Arch is a very thirsty paper. So if I mix my color here, I need to have more water and more pigment on my brush to begin with, because it needs more water, Arch, to be able to paint it. And if I clean my brush and I don't take the excess water off of it, and I try to soften it, there's more chance to create really ugly looking backgrounds using Arch paper. Saunders is a little bit more forgiving, and I'm going to leave this one here. And also, if you're painting your mountain and you have very little water on your brush to soften it. For example, I'm cleaning my brush, taking the excess water, and I'm trying to soften it. If there isn't enough water on my brush, you can see that it's kind of hard. The brush doesn't glide on top of the texture of the paper. This brush holds a lot of water, so no matter how much I take the excess water, still holds a good amount of water on it. But this is less risky compared to using a lot of water, but still you want to practice this on a piece of paper before you use it in your actual painting, so you really understand the technique and get comfortable with it. And I really recommend you choose one paper and just practice your watercolor paintings on that one paper, so that you really understand the techniques and how watercolor works, because different papers behave differently and can be confusing, especially when you're just starting out and you don't really know water paint ratio, you haven't felt it yet on your papers. So it's really important to use the same paper, use a good quality paper, and practice on that, and that way you really understand. And if you move on to a different paper after that, after using that paper once, you really understand that does that paper needs more water, does it need less water, and you adjust really quickly. I have a video that I talked about watercolor papers. I link it in the description box if you like to check it out, but it's a very important tip to use just one paper and really take your time to understand these techniques. Another tip that I wanted to talk about is not having enough water on your brush while you are painting your mountains or any shape that you're painting. If you don't have to, like I said, this brush holds a lot of water, but if I paint my mountain kind of on a drier side, this is what I struggled with for the longest time when I was painting with watercolors, because I just didn't have enough water on my brush and it would just look dry. And when I cleaned my brush and took the excess water and tried to soften edges, there was already hard edges starting to form. So it was really hard for me to have a nice, clean, fresh looking watercolor painting, especially for landscapes, because I wasn't using enough water on my brush. So that's another very important tip. You can see here how differently Arch is reacting here. This is why I don't recommend this paper for beginners, because it's harder to use it. It's more sensitive. You really need to know what you're doing to get a good result out of Arch. But Saunders, even though I went back and I had a lot of water on my brush, but it looks kind of good. It doesn't look too bad at all, actually. So it's very, very important the kind of paper you're using, and having a good sized brush to soften the edges. And once you get more experienced, you can even soften edges with a flat brush. It's a little bit harder, so don't start practicing using a flat brush. But once you get more experience, you'll see that you can do it with any kind of brush. But to begin with, you want to have a round brush like this that doesn't really have a fine tip. I know it kind of looks like it has a fine tip, but it doesn't. It's kind of a loose brush compared to the silver black velvet brush that is more of a defined look. It's a little bit harder to soften edges using this brush, so you want it to be a little bit more not too much of a harsh point for the brush. It will be easier to soften edges using that brush, and overall have a more loose and atmospheric looking painting. And you want to have enough water on your brush while you paint and to soften edges. All these tips are very important, so definitely practice it on a piece of paper, like I said, so that you're comfortable and you won't have to worry about it when you're actually using this technique on your watercolor paintings. This is very useful for painting landscapes, for painting birds, flowers, honestly anything. Just being able to soften edges gives you, and also it gives you more fresher look compared to painting wet on wet. Wet on wet is great too for depending on what you're doing, but this is a very, very useful technique to master as well. I really hope you enjoyed watching this video. Let me know what you think in the comment section, and I'll see you in the next one. Happy painting!